All right, let's start with this is Deion today on Twitter saying folks don't hate you because they really don't know you. They admire you in a negative way. They realize they can't be you, think like you, talk like you, or walk in your shoes. That bothers them. Always smile when you see them because that makes them admire you so much more in that negative way. Now, this all is part of what Deion thinks anyway. And I actually think he's done a pretty good job at Colorado. The record last year, I don't know what the realistic, I guess, expectations were. He put them on the map even with the terrible ending of losing 8 of the last 9. But this comes down to Max Olson, theathletic.com, who joins us most every Thursday, wrote an article and checked in on all, or not all, a lot of the former players who were let go or asked to leave or just had no communication. They decided to hit the portal and have, in some cases, enjoyed where they are, had success, and some are still looking for a way to play college football. So let me ask you this. I think that Deion's polarizing. I like him. I like the way he sounds. I don't always like the way he may coach, but I like him. Paul, is this, no matter what, portal or not this year, not quite as much, although it's just May 1st. What do you think it is about Deion? People root against him because they are thinking about who he was at prime time, or he's too glitz and glamour, what?
Yeah, I think people made up their minds on Deion before he was ever a coach. I mean, this is not like he's just now famous. He's been famous for a very long time. And because he's not only a coach but a celebrity coach, people are going to fall into one or two camps about him as opposed to being kind of in the middle and let's see what happens. That camp is one I'll call the Craig Smoak camp. Craig's very much a we'll see what happens, like whether I need to be excited about this or not.
I think I've been very fair to Deion.
I
haven't taken the cheap shots. I haven't gone he's an attention getter, and a lot of people talk about him probably more than they need to because people will watch you talk about Deion because he's so polarizing. And I don't choose to do that, and I choose to just say, let's see what happens. And that's not the thing to do. I understand that. That's not what I probably should do. But
that's where most people live in these things, right? Is on one side or the other, and not kind of like, well, we'll see. I mean, look, if Deion hauls off and goes 9-3 in the Big 12 this year, then guess what? What he's doing is working. And, so we'll see what happens. I think, though, my personal opinion is that Deion needs to get beyond the place, and the way that he does that is by winning, where he's got to be constantly on defense mode. Like, yes, Max wrote this column about, these guys who have all left and have gone, and he got their perspective. That's their opinion. I don't think this was a hit piece on Deion at all. I just think this was such a unique situation, even in a time where people are sending out people in the portal. Deion sent 53 dudes out of the program in a matter of months to flip over the roster and all those things. So asking the questions to a good chunk of those 53 is interesting in the college football space. Deion has to go not be on the defensive. His kids absolutely don't need to say anything about it. Don't need to say anything. Look, if one of those kids' experience with Deion was negative, well, that was from his perspective, and maybe it wasn't from Deion's, but that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Xavier Smith. I'm glad he landed at UTEP. Wish good landing spots for everybody. I think Deion is just such a polarizing guy that it's popular to criticize the guy because there's a large army of people that are right there to take up arms with you and go, yeah, he's a punk and he's not a good coach and he's going to fail at Colorado and this and that, and that want to see him fail. There's a large crowd that wants to see him fail for whatever reasons. And then there's the crowd that Deion walks on water, and a bunch of them are going into their second year of ever being Colorado fans, a lot of them. And then there's some that just no matter where he goes, they're Deion fans. They're not the brand fans. And so those two parties clash a lot, and they all get a lot of attention both ways. And so there's just this huge conversation that continuously goes on around him and his program, and especially when they're not doing well, like they didn't do well last year. And he has to eat words, and I know I never eat words, whatever. But whenever things aren't going his way or they look like they're a little off, his side doesn't say like, hey, maybe we made a mistake. They double down and you're wrong. And let's quote Bible verses and tell you why you don't matter to us and why you are garbage compared to us. And so that ruffles feathers even further, and they kind of ramp it up themselves, I think, in that regard. And then even when he does things well, there's another side's not going to ever acknowledge that or give him the chance to ever just do something and not have it be like this big thing that we debate and criticize. So it's going to be a fascinating tug of war between those two sides this upcoming season when you have to lay the results out there actually on the field, because he's either going to rise and they're going to be a better team, or he's going to give that side that loves to poke holes in the aura that is Deion the coach. He's going to give them a lot more ammunition like he did down the second half of the season last year. So I think in this particular case, Xavier Smith or whoever else has every right to sit there and talk about their experience, and they owe Deion and company absolutely nothing. And technically, Shedeur Sanders or anybody else on that team has every right to go onto Instagram or whatever other platform and talk. But if Quinn Ewers was out there dogging on a Texas wide receiver and all his other teammates, like, I don't even know who that is, or any other quarterback for that matter, I think it would be a big deal. I don't think it's just that it's just because it's Shedeur. I think it's because your starting quarterback typically doesn't behave that way, especially when you're not all that to begin with. Y'all weren't good last year. You were good for a month, and then you completely flamed out. Now, was that on Shedeur necessarily? Not entirely. So, this is a prove-it year. I think you got to prove that your system and the way that you're designing this team is working. And I think, there's a lot to look at in the build-up to it as we look at all teams and we flesh them out and we talk about them for months on end. There's a lot of reason for concern when you got 50-plus guys in the portal. And you're talking about being better this year. There's reasons to believe that that's going to be kind of hard to do when you have so much roster influx. And where does that roster influx result from? It results from your decisions and your attitude and your behavior. And when Shedeur's sitting there knocking a guy who basically you just pushed out the door and is saying like, hey, man, I just wanted to be like human beings and y'all just treated me like garbage, and you react the way Shedeur did, yeah, it's going to rile people up even further. So it's got all the makings of being a hot social media mess, and that's what it is more than a winning football program at the moment. And I wonder when the latter is going to matter more than the former. But right now, Colorado is a social media program much less than it is a championship-winning program.
They lost, 8 of the last 9. Had a great start, beat TCU, had played for the national title. That ended up being not quite what everyone thought, but it was still a nice win. Then they thumped Nebraska, beat Colorado State in an unbelievable game. I remember staying up really late that night to watch the end of that game. Would we be talking about Colorado football if Deion wasn't there?
No, of course not. Yeah. Or Shedeur. I mean, it's the combination. It's him and both of his sons, and the fact that they're so outspoken and they're so famous, and so there's a lot of attention that other people just don't typically get. And I challenge anybody to name like the last 2 or 3 Colorado quarterbacks. I bet most of the country would have a hard time doing that, right? So this is a different kind of star power that's in Boulder now. And yeah, that's absolutely why we're talking about Colorado. It has nothing to do just necessarily with what Shedeur said or what Deion has said or what Deion has done. There would be articles written about it at any program if there's 50-plus players in the portal at back-to-back years. Yeah. GJ got some heat, but he's just not Deion Sanders famous. So, it absolutely is magnified. I don't think you'd see all the media guys. I asked one time about there's a media guy who I feel like every time I see him, he's like knocking Deion for something or poking. And I asked Paul one time, I was like, did him and Deion like have a thing at one point? Because I'm just trying to figure out like where all this animosity comes from. And so I don't think that was the case. I think it's just been built up or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of people that get rubbed the wrong way, and they have their opinions on social media and their shows. And there's a lot of people that are Team Deion, and they'll push back on that. And so, I feel like it revolves around to the same basic thing: winning. He's either going to win and his system's going to be, backed by the fact that it worked, or he's going to have another season like last season, and then all the things that he leans on or says are going to be kind of hard to continue to defend if you're not winning football games, but you're pushing numerous guys into the portal every year, and you've got guys coming out saying like, hey, I wish you would have treated me a little bit better. Now, look, I don't think every college coach handles every transfer or cut, so to speak, like it's a personal relationship. I think that that's something that you probably could get from guys all over the rest of the country, but it is Deion in Colorado, so again, it's magnified a little bit more.
Kim Coulter, I have no opinion one way or the other on Deion. I wish no ill will. From MC Gusto, I'll say it, in some folks' minds, it doesn't help that he's an outspoken black person.
Yeah, that definitely, I think race definitely plays into it to some extent for some people. That rubs them the wrong way. I think we'd be foolish, especially in college football, to think that that's not part of it. I don't think it's the overwhelming reason. I think Deion's just brash, and that's a lot of it. And but I do think there's an element to that for some people. Absolutely, yeah.
Kyle Visser, he interests me as a person, but no love or hate from me either way.
That's where I've been. It's like I was never a Deion fan growing up. I was a Redskins fan. Now, technically, he came to the Redskins, eventually
very much damaged goods
for a pit stop late in his career, and so that wasn't what I hoped that it would be when I was thinking of Deion on my favorite team. But I never disliked the guy. If he was not on your team, you hated him because he was brash and he was cocky, and he was in your face, and he was really good, and he was probably picking off your quarterback and running it back to the house, and so you didn't want that.
Return,
yeah, and so, but beyond that, I just think he's a great athlete from my era that is sitting here trying to find his way as a football coach. And do I believe that he's going to be successful? Not necessarily. Am I rooting for him to not be successful? Absolutely not. I'm just sitting here hoping that Colorado can continue to keep this flicker of attention, because I think it's good for the Big 12 in the long run. But I also know that you have to win. Otherwise, it just becomes a story about losing, and nobody cares whether you're Deion or not after a while. So, I'm with most people in that. I'm kind of down the middle. I do think, though, a situation like the Shador comments yesterday, I just think that's a bad look. And he's going to have his own opinion and all that. I just think it's a bad look as a leader. And I think that could be handled differently than to put a guy on blast like that, especially when he's opening up and he's not taking personal shots. He's just kind of like, if anything, trying to teach you a little bit of a lesson maybe of like, hey, I know you got to do what you got to do, but like, could you maybe hand it a little bit differently? That's how I read it anyways. And they chose to take it, to basically be a thing where now they're going to knock the guy and treat him like he's a nobody. And I don't like when people do that. I don't like when people try to act like they're above it. So in that way, it's easy to see why people got rubbed the wrong way with that.
Clint Moses, Oregon State fan, Clint. CU fanboy saying that Athletic article was written by a Nebraska alum and Max Olson. Max Olson's a pro. Yes, he went to Nebraska-Lincoln. I don't think Max Olson wrote the story to help Nebraska football any or to take a shot. I thought the article was interesting. When I read it, in fact, I believe I sent it to everybody, or text or whatever. I thought it was very interesting. That doesn't mean I believe everything that everyone said that was a part of the program that was released, no matter how or what conversations there were. To me, it was like, oh, damn, that's a good idea. So there we are with that, and I just wanted to start that off with today. Now, Brian Howe, he covers Colorado. Put this up, and we're not going to read all of this, but this is one of the things he said. Athletic got what it wanted with the story, but was there a need for yet another story on the players who moved out of the program a year ago? No, let it go.
All right.
Hold on. I had not really seen very many articles about those who had been released from the program. And talking about any coach hired by an irrelevant program off 111 doesn't immediately try to change the culture, and the roster isn't doing their job. And then he goes down the list. Now, Brian covers Colorado. We've had him on the show numerous times back when realignment started, and then also throughout the last season or two.
Yeah, I like Brian, and I think he does a good job with the coverage, and I can understand when you're on the beat, you kind of maybe take things a little bit more personal. And I think that, number one, I don't agree with that at all. Don't tell reporters to let it go. They write about whatever the hell they want to write about.
Yeah.
And it's not your job to tell people what to write about, or especially in light of it being because it's anti-Deion. Like, if Max Olson wants to write, or anybody else for that matter, about Deion in any way, shape, or form, that's their right. So I don't agree with the approach on number one, because I just feel like that's not really your job as a media brethren to sit there and tell somebody else what to be writing about. Number two, yes, he's absolutely right on that. I think everybody expected change. They got change. They just maybe got more than they bargained for. Three is within that same way as well. And, that's a lot on block 4 that I haven't read. So the way the system's set up. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of change needed at Colorado. I don't think anybody's denying that. And certainly to his last point, yeah, there are players that go away. Like we know of a Baylor player that got a lot of media attention who was a walk-on, who got a little bit over his skis and started acting way bigger than his britches ever fit. And to the point of he kind of started lying in the media to get attention. And it was a really bad look. And I think everybody just chose to ignore him, to just let it basically go away. But there are certainly spurned players who can be bitter. And you know what? There may have been a Colorado player or 2 or 5 who have spoken. I haven't followed this whole saga. I don't know about you guys. I don't know about all these articles I don't know about all these articles. I'm not reading about every guy that leads.
This first one
I've read. Same here. So if there's a bunch of them, then I guess there's probably a good chance that one of them's a bitter guy who maybe didn't work hard enough and that he wants to turn around and blame Deion. There is certainly that possibility there as well. So, yeah, I don't read that and say like, oh, Deion, what a piece of garbage, and I'm still in the middle. I think Max had valid points in telling that side of the story. I don't think there's anything wrong with telling both sides of the story in this instance, and I think Max is probably getting unfairly attacked a little bit, and I can see why Colorado's always defensive because they always feel like they're being attacked. But, sometimes you are asking for it as well, and sometimes when you go out in the public and you say something, especially when you're knocking a former teammate and acting like he's some nobody whose name you don't even remember, guess what? That attention that you get, it's not always going to be 100% favorable, especially when, people don't agree with how you handled that. And that's really what this boils down to. So I don't hate Shedeur. I don't hate Deion. I don't think anybody up here does. But, there's definitely things that you can see why people have this growing resentment or, I guess, buildup of disliking that program and really trying to blast it as much as possible.
The architect, y'all need Deion. You certainly spend a lot of time discussing him. Send him some royalties. We don't need Deion.
Bro, we hadn't talked about Deion in like a minute. It's been a long time that we've sat and talked about Deion,
because it's
brother.
a topic. It's a discussion. And this was not brought up to be critical. It was brought up to have, let's discuss it. Is he someone that gets unfairly criticized? Does he at times earn it? I like the guy. And so it's a story today because of what has happened in the last couple of days. And then he put up on Twitter what he said, Shedeur with what he said. Nobody has sat there and said they agree or disagree with him. It's a discussion, which I think we need more of rather than, oh, my God, we're talking about it. I think it's a great story what he's done at Colorado myself, no matter the record.
Bro, I think we've just had the most fair, balanced conversation on this entire thing that we could possibly have without picking a side. So if you can't handle that, then I don't know what to tell you. If you can't handle a reasonable conversation surrounding this guy that clearly props you up in some kind of way, then I don't know what to tell you, because there's definitely other podcasts that just bash him incessantly and for no reason sometimes, and then there's those that are completely blindly loyal and can't see past the star, the brightness of that star. We're looking at both sides, and if you can't handle what we've been saying about it, then maybe you need to take the blinders off, man. I don't know.
Well, that's the same thing about what are comedians going to do when this politician is gone? You're like, well, there've been comedians before. They'll just have to write new material. Again, we don't need Deion to do things. This was just interesting because, and not even really because of Deion, mostly because of Shedeur. To me, it makes it more interesting when you've got a starting quarterback who, apropos of nothing, just starts kind of dogging people because they, were telling their story. That's where it was interesting. And I get Deion defending his kid and defending his program. It's just a unique situation. And the reason that Deion is interesting and topical is because we've not seen anything really like this before, which is why the column was interesting.
Yes.
Because it went in depth with not the guys who went to Colorado, the guys who day one, look, coaches all walk in and say, here's my plan, and they maybe don't make it as entertaining and they don't video it and put it out on YouTube.
When he had the first meeting, he said, some of you who are sitting in here today won't be here when we come back for camp.
Said,
and there's for some that were they clutched their pearls.
He very clearly said this, I'm bringing my own bags, and they're Louis, okay? That was not necessarily the case. He brought a couple of Louis bags. He brought Travis Hunter, and he brought Shedeur and Shiloh. The rest were the American Tourister. They're fine. Some of them were, let me get this at Target because my suitcase got damaged on a Spirit flight. But he he's polarizing.
And so thank you for your feedback, a bunch of you in the chat room. Different views of opinion, which is why we love it that you guys are here to also give us your opinion. And
we actually welcome it because there are
absolutely
different opinions out there, and not necessarily is one just right and one's just wrong. So thanks for everybody, whether you agree or disagree, but I think that's about as balanced as you can be. And we're still going to, I know me at least, we're going to forge ahead and just react to what actually happens, not what we personally, feel like towards a guy. And I think we made it clear we don't feel negative towards Deion Sanders, but it is an interesting article. Whether you like it or not, it is an interesting article worth talking about, and so is Shador's response.
Kim Coulter, there was nothing wrong with what he said. Jesus, I loved what he said in that opening meeting. Blunt, to the point, no false expectations, reality. You can like the way he goes about doing it or not. We will come back and